What's going on, Occupy family? It's your boy Walid. I'm here with the usual Brian, and also have a special guest on today's podcast, Jack. Those of you that have been with us long enough might remember him from last Wild Card Sunday or last Wild Card Weekend a year ago when he did win 50 grand. And he's also the creator of dfsMagic, our favorite product at Occupy Fantasy to use for our max entries. What's up, Jack?
Hey, Walid, how's it going, man? Thanks for having me.
How was that for an intro? I thought it was pretty weak.
I thought it was great, man. I don't even need to say anything other than, appreciate you guys having me on here again and looking forward to talking through things with you.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, 1 year anniversary edition, and we're going to try and discuss this week wild card slate as well as all the possible edges to have. Brian, you want to kind of start the bigger picture here?
Yeah, what's up, guys? Glad we could all get together for this. And yeah, so we got 4 games this weekend, 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday. FanDuel, for whatever reason, has decided to make two big game slates as opposed to one big 4 game slate like DraftKings did. But a lot of this analysis will apply to whichever type of slate you're playing. And I think, guys, the first thing we should talk about, Walid, I'll start with you, is the line moves that we've seen so far here. So just a quick recap. Houston's 2.5 point favorites over Buffalo. Totals now at 43.5. New England's 5 point favorites, 44 point total over Tennessee. New Orleans 8 point home favorites, 49.5 point total against Minnesota. And Philly is 1.5 point home underdogs against Seattle with a 45 point total. But lead, we've seen some big moves already with
Yeah.
three of these totals moving up.
Yeah, three of them going up. The only one going down was the Seahawks and Eagles by a point. But you had 2 points for the Houston Buffalo game. You got 2 points for the Patriots-Titans game, and then you got 3 points for the Saints and Vikings game. So not really one game in particular to kind of zero in on line movement. Instead, it's sprinkled on across the board.
Yeah, Jack, what was your initial thought when you saw some of these totals move up so quickly?
I guess the totals, I'm not sure. Didn't have a direct reaction to them, but I just more the lines in the betting action. Like for one, New England only being a 5 point favorite against a guy who's never played a playoff game before at home. I mean, they're at New England,
Mm.
and let's remember Ryan Tannehill's not been an all-star for his career, and the fact that betting action's pretty equal. People seem to think it's gonna be a close game. And then the other one is just Seattle, road favorite with all their injuries. I know
Yeah.
Philly's super banged up, but I mean
Mhm.
that's kind of a really crazy line and betting action to me on that one. I guess particularly for that one I'd question any line movement going up just because of all the injuries. But what do you guys
Yeah.
think?
I think you're spot on as far as the public being high on both Tennessee and Seattle. Like, let's face it, Tennessee's been one of the hotter teams in the league since Ryan Tannehill stepped in for Mariota, and the Patriots just lost a very important game last week to the Dolphins at home. Right? It wasn't just some. It may as well have been like a wild card esque game for them as far as the importance of it, because now they're playing wild card weekend. So that certainly has left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And then with Seattle, despite them losing, I think just kind of how they played with San Fran, and not to mention, we know how banged up the Eagles are. They're kind of like, we knew the NFC East winner would kind of go into the playoffs as like that default playoff team without much steam.
Yeah, and I think, this is the ultimate recency bias perfect storm with Tennessee and New England. As much as I hate to think New England's in a good spot in the playoffs,
Mm,
Tennessee just clinched a wild card berth with a decisive win over Houston. Even though Houston was resting their starters, public's not going to care about that. New England lost a 17-point home favorite game against Miami. Now they're meeting in the playoffs, and it's no surprise that Tennessee's getting a majority of the bets, and the line has moved in their favor. And Jack, you're the big short slate guru here. So you won the 50K in the wild card weekend a year ago. You won the 20K on the Thanksgiving slate. Just for me, from a high risk game theory leverage perspective, I think that a New England stack is probably one of the better spots of the weekend.
That's my favorite one, man. So I learned a ton from you about how to play the single game slates this year, and by extension, I've kind of learned that your strategy applies very well to these small slates as well. And I totally agree that there's going to be obviously a ton of people with Derrick Henry, and, rightfully so to an extent, but it's still an extremely tough matchup for them. People are going to be shying away from the Patriots passing stacks. I completely agree with you, and it'll be under-owned.
For sure. I mean, look, Julian Edelman last week had 3 catches for 26 yards, and I mean, the last 3 weeks, these are his target totals: 7, 6, and 5. Now the 3 weeks, really the 3 weeks before that, he had 12 targets, 12 targets, 12 targets. And it had been essentially a good 8-9 week stretch of double-digit targets. The Patriots are back in the playoffs. We know what Julian Edelman does in the postseason.
We are well aware. We are well aware, by the way.
Yeah, well aware. So, let me ask you guys this. Obviously, the Patriots as an offense will probably be underutilized. Do you think the same is going to be said for Julian Edelman, or do you think folks are going to kind of tilt that way given what we know?
Yeah, I think just because of the name brand, I actually prefer his teammates over him. Sanu, who's
Mm-hmm.
on our underperforming receiver list this week, the short list in the Wild Card Weekend. N'Keal Harry was heavily involved last week. Edelman, I really think Jack is super banged up. Like, he's got the knee, he's got the shoulder, clear limp when he's walking into the stadium, and you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
tell. We'll see. I mean, we'll see. I'll still use him in some stacks, but I think I would prioritize the other guys over Edelman. I'm not sure if you're thinking the same thing.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't think you get a huge advantage on Edelman there.
Mm-hmm.
I did notice that you had those guys as underperformers. That has been an awesome list all year. Really appreciate being able to access that and learn that from you guys. But yeah, I mean, I think Brady, will go very, very underowned. And even if you want to use other stacks, just getting more exposure to all of those players you just mentioned is a great way to gain leverage over the field, because those guys will be very low owned throughout the weekend.
So talk to me about the other side of the ball here for Tennessee. We know A.J. Brown has really been one of the most electrifying um, players in the league. Forget just rookies, the way he's stepped in. But he does get Stephon Gilmore this week. 2 questions. Number one, how do you think the public and, let's say the large GPP pools are going to react to someone like A.J. Brown on a slate like this? And number two, how do you personally feel about him going in against probably the toughest matchup you can ask for?
I think, like Jack said, that the public's going to be on Derrick Henry on this side,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone in the world knows the Patriots have an incredible pass defense. Stephon Gilmore is the best corner in the league. This is the narrative, and he's up there. He's definitely one of the best. And I think as a result, people will be off of Tannehill, AJ Brown, and Jonnu Smith, Corey Davis. So I think they'll go under-owned, and I'm not that worried about it. We saw Devontae Parker make Gilmore look silly last week. A.J.
Mm-hmm.
Brown's an exceptional talent. So, Jack, I don't know what you're thinking as far as the Titans passing game.
Yeah, I would defer to you on the ownership predictions, but just as a feeling, I mean, I agree. I think people will, be all in on Henry. And, it's tough to go against Gilmore, especially you figure a guy like that's going to want to be motivated to bounce back. But at the same time, Brown is an extremely talented guy. All he needs is one play. He even gets, he scored on a 50-yard end around.
Yeah.
So it's not like he needs to beat Gilmore in coverage on a play to score.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, and he's a huge upside guy. Wally, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing high risk contests, that's kind of the name of the game, right? Obviously, not someone you'd roster in, even cash game triple ups in my eyes. I think there are better, safer options. But as far as going for the gold in a large contest, that is a sort of bias you're looking to play against, right? That Stephon Gilmore matchup, that at New England game where folks will look to kind of stay away from. And like you said, A.J. Brown, I mean, he was even returning punts last week. So he's the type of guy that will give you leverage if he can deliver on 2-3 big plays.
One question, I don't have it in front of me, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times with these short slates, it kind of comes down to a player at a price point needs to outscore another player at that price point. Is AJ Brown right around another big time receiver or two in this one on either site?
That's a good question. I have to pull it
That's
up.
a great question. Yeah, I mean, he's right now. He's probably as far as DraftKings goes. I think, if I'm not mistaken, like you look at DeAndre Hopkins and Michael Thomas. Those might be the only two guys that are priced higher than him. And I mean, it's kind of scary when I mean, DeAndre Hopkins doesn't have the best matchup in the world either, right?
Yeah.
Now Michael Thomas is on his own tier. He's like $2,000 more than either of these guys. But I guess you can't really compare him there. But
what about Tyler Lockett on FanDuel? Because FanDuel Lockett is $600 cheaper than Brown, so kind of the same tier. And I imagine everyone knows about Philly's porous pass defense. So I think Lockett should be double, triple the ownership of Brown. I think at least that's my early projection.
You would think so, but then again, I think Lockett has also had so many of these dud games in the last, 5, 6. I mean, he had a pretty good game last week. He even had like 4 red zone targets, but after even coming back from the injury, like he's had some games where he's legit, not done anything. So whereas AJ Brown has been electrifying. So I don't know if it's going to be that much of a massive gap, but I think there are two very comparable guys.
I think it's Hopkins. That's the one.
Yeah.
I bet you see at least double Hopkins ownership to AJ Brown this weekend, and there's no good reason for it, right? Like
first game on Saturday, right? I think sometimes people are more inclined when they're making these lineups like an hour or two before the game. They're like, oh, I want to see DeAndre Hopkins and get off to a good start.
It's just a sexy stack, right? Watson, Hopkins, everyone wants to use it. But like the reality is, is it, let's say he's doubly owned as AJ Brown. Is he twice as likely to have a huge game as AJ Brown? Like absolutely not, right?
I don't
there's your
think
leverage
so.
right there.
Yeah, that's a great call. That's how we should be looking at these types of matchups, especially on short slates, because we have very clear options to look at. Any other spots on this slate that you guys like? So, Walid, the Saints have the highest team total. I imagine they'll have a majority of the ownership here. What are your thoughts on them being so popular, and any other under-the-radar stacks besides this New England-Tennessee game?
Well, yeah, I think the Saints are definitely going to be the public's favorite, rightfully so. 8-point home favorites. They should have, if all was right in the world, they'd have a first-round bye. I think we all probably agree that they're better than the Packers. But really bringing it back, and if what we expect here to happen is for the Saints to kind of take the Vikings out of their typical game script where they can run the ball nonstop. I mean, Kirk Cousins, if he's forced to throw the ball, you got Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen, who this time last year, let's say they were in a wild card game, they would be really, really popular given the years they had. But now with this new offense, it's just rare. We haven't seen the Vikings as 8-point underdogs, and I think there's potential on the other end of the ball here.
Yeah, Jack, what do you think?
I think in general, Vikings players probably go under-owned. My gut, I have no numbers, but my gut is kind of like, this is a game where no one expects much of Cousins, which makes me think he's more likely to actually ball out, even if they lose. It's more like a game where like he's kind of expected to win is where he would choke. Brian, we haven't talked about running back exposure here. How do you see Dalvin Cook's been hurt. Obviously, he was a huge favorite for a while. Like, how do you see that playing out? Do you think he might go a little under on this weekend?
Yeah, I think he will. I think everyone's going to be on Kamara, who's $200 more on FanDuel at least, and then Henry as the top option is going to be popular. But then after that, it's pretty murky for every other running back situation. I guess Singletary will probably be the next most popular, but as a result, I do think Cook ends up being under-owned. And his injury, if you listen to most injury experts that we like to listen to, that we give credibility to, he could have played in Week 16. And because they had basically their spot locked up, they let him rest, make sure his shoulder or chest, whatever it was, fully healed. And I think he is. So, Cook's the type of guy that he's going to play no matter what the game script is as well. And I think this is a perfect 1v1, similar price point. Can he outscore this other guy? Yes, he can definitely outscore Kamara.
Yeah, like is Kamara twice as likely to outscore him Probably not,
No.
especially with all his passing game involvement. And I don't remember the exact every single player on the Saints, but they had a lot of injuries to linebackers, safeties, defensive linemen. So, guys that impact the run game.
Yeah, I mean, Cook is definitely game script proof, and he's going to be on the field more percentage of snaps than Kamara, right? Like just naturally with the way they use their offense. Hopefully not, though. Maybe they'll unleash Kamara. Let me ask you about two running backs that are as unsexy as it gets, but they are home favorites. Sony Michel and Carlos Hyde.
That's interesting. Yeah,
The unsexiest running backs on the slate, right? But it makes you think they will probably be under-owned. And my argument for Sony Michel, I mean, look what he did last postseason. If the Patriots are, let's say they are up a touchdown or their offense gets in sync, which should be hard to envision. But, I mean, it is January now. Sony Michel is one of these guys who can get in the end zone multiple times.
I mean, look at his involvement in the last 3 weeks. 19 carries against Cincinnati, 21 against Buffalo, 18 against Miami. So we can realistically expect at least 15 touches in this matchup. And that's hard to say for a lot of these running backs. And as a home favorite, I agree. I think Michel's a great tournament play. Everyone in that New England offense, I think, is a great tournament play.
Yeah.
Hyde is where I think also will get some leverage. Paying all the way up at receiver and ignoring some of the expensive running backs and playing and using some of these cheaper guys could be one option, Jack.
Yeah,
sure.
I love Hyde. Normally I hate him, but this weekend, it's a perfect way to get leverage off of the Hopkins Watson stack. I'd say particularly on FanDuel where it's so touchdown dependent. I mean, one touchdown swings that in your favor.
Exactly.
Like you said, Wade, it's not a sexy player. No one wants to use him, but the reality is he scores touchdowns that often. He gets 20 carries a game a lot. So
for sure, and the home favorite. So, so now I know with FanDuel. So they are technically offering 3 slates, right? The Saturday main slate, the Saturday Sunday, which doesn't seem to have as many good contests, and then the Sunday. Talk to me about these 2-day slates and kind of your approach for. I mean, I know last year we talked about this, but like late swapping on Sunday morning, and really assessing what you've done up until this point Sunday morning and changing the rest of your lineups.
Yeah, Jack, I'll defer to you since you had such a big decision and have done this before in the past with such success.
Oh yeah, so they can't agree enough with what these guys put out in the content. You have to be willing to actually take 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, if you're max entering context and actually look through your lineups. And I think you're just looking for, has every guy, we kind of talked last year about the 25-point rule. Can everyone on my team score 25? If you have lineups where half the guys are kind of in that territory, then you start looking at, are you high enough on the list that you can play the chalk players and win? Brian, maybe you can touch on a little bit of that strategy of kind of how you want to, leverage away from the field and leave salary on the table when you might be pretty close but not quite near the top.
Yeah, it's really tough. Like on Sunday morning after 2 games, or in the middle, after 2 games have passed, you got 2 games to go, and you have an entire morning to make these decisions. So it's really nice because you have plenty of time to do it. It's not like a Thanksgiving slate where you have 20 minutes to figure it out before the last game of the slate. So you really should be spending a lot of time doing this. And if you're high enough in a contest to where you can see who's in front of you and what they have left, then it's very easy. You just play the best plays that you think is going to score the most points. If you're a little further down and you can't see everyone in front of you, you have to look at ownership from the previous day to see, where you thought guys would be and whether or not they were higher or lower, and that would impact the Sunday ownership. And then figuring out if the guys in front of you have receivers, running backs, or whatever, think that they're going to have the popular guys, and you'll have to make some decisions. Like Jack last year, you had to make some swaps with the quarterback because you thought everyone would be on, I think it was Lamar, right? And you switched to Trubisky and Allen Robinson, right? Was that right?
No, I actually had them in, and I was tempted to switch to Lamar, and I didn't. Yeah,
which is a really good. I mean, you thought about it, you considered it, but you didn't tilt, right? Which is kind of the danger in playing this game, where, you had the right lineup in, and then you get too cute the next morning because all of a sudden you think, oh, well, I actually need, X, Y, and Z to happen. But in reality, you won't really know just because other people don't have, you haven't revealed their roster yet, doesn't mean that they're going to have exactly what you have. So,
Right.
really situational awareness, understanding, okay, in this situation, Trubisky wasn't really a guy that most people were probably seeking out. He wasn't that chalky of a play. And understanding, okay, like, where are you ranked? How many, like, what percentage of, like, people do you expect to have the guy you have versus the guy you're going to get? And also, what's the difference between finishing second and finishing 8th or 10th if you're ranked like 30th? That could be an entire, 20 times return difference, or it could be very gradual.
Right. I can point to on Thanksgiving, because it's more recent in my mind, very specific examples of swapping and not swapping. I think you're completely right about the tilt thing. I definitely would never make a change unless you have a clear reason to do it. Don't just switch guys around because like you think you should because you're in contention. So like going into the night game, I talked to Brian, the one that I got second. I had Ridley, Cook, and Saints defense, and we had a long discussion about, I had a flex spot open, so I could have done a lot of things. I could have probably done something with Kamara or Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
And we ultimately reasoned.
And that's so tempting, man.
Yeah. Yeah. But the reality is everyone had the Saints, and I stuck with Ridley, and he outperformed them, and I was able to move up the field. I can point to one that I did make some swaps. I had three lineups that were like very similar last year. They had like the exact same lineup except for one single player, and I just decided they were all kind of high enough that I wanted a little more variety, and that like I didn't want to depend on those same two running backs in all of them, right? So that's an example where you look and say, okay, at least one of these I want to kind of get away from, such a commonality.
The correlation bit for sure, where you've kind of earned the right to maybe go a little less riskier, for sure. So,
and this,
go ahead.
So just to interrupt really quickly, like, this applies to these big field contests as well, in 100-player leagues even. But, I mean, it's just as important, if not more important, for cash games too. If you're playing head-to-heads and double-ups, like, you absolutely have to go through before the Sunday 2 games to see what your opponents have, because you may be blocked and have 0% chance of winning if you don't swap.
For sure. I mean, this applies to like we have these conversations often, even in like NHL, right? Where like you're in a tournament and you had the 7:00 games go, and then all of a sudden, let's say you had a 7:00 stack that just went off, but you had one at 10:00 that was way riskier. You might, kind of start playing it safer depending on what your goals are given the specific contest. So, all good stuff, fellas. Definitely something to keep in mind. So, let's just wrap it up here with the underperforming receiver list. And Brian, you want to kind of run through that?
Yeah, for sure. So we have to be careful with the underperforming receivers, especially at the end of the year, because playing time changes and teams are starters and whatnot. So, we've been careful the last few weeks to carefully cultivate this list and not just blindly run it out, but pick and choose guys that are in spots and have, include
looking
guys.
At the context.
Yes,
looking at the context.
Exactly. Putting context into place. So, because John Brown didn't play last week, he wouldn't have qualified for this list. But if you look at the previous 3 games when he did play, massively underperformed. So John Brown headlines this week's underperforming receivers list. Gotta love that against Houston. Mohamed Sanu is there as well. And then, like we mentioned earlier, Edelman and N'Keal Harry just missed. So 3 Patriots on that list, just even more reason to stack up that side of that game in high-risk contests.
You trust Tom Brady in the playoffs? That's crazy.
I don't.
What does it come to, right? But awesome. All right, well, Jack, appreciate you joining us. Hopefully you're back next week with maybe some good news as we reflect on this
fingers
Sunday.
crossed.
We'll be around this weekend. You know where to find us at Occupy Fantasy. And if you're going into your Sunday morning slate and you feel like you got to reevaluate your lineup in a higher contest, like we'd love to have those conversations. So feel free to @ us. But it's been a pleasure, guys, and we'll be back at it soon.